Hello, I'm male feminist Anders Bloom, and because all lives matter here at Thorin's channel, I give you a big welcome.
Right, this is episode 59 of Counterpoints, and our guest for this one is WallabeeBeatle, who you may know from his own podcast, Writer's Block. I was on it one episode. The other episodes, bit of a mixed bag, really. Take it or leave it. Depends on what you think of the guest, doesn't it? So, well, much like many podcasts. Also someone who, while I will just state at the outset, has never worked for me in any way, was never even a research assistant for me in any way, is just a person that I've retweeted some of their articles and posted someone to Reddit. But nonetheless, the reason why I'm setting this up, Wallaby, is you haven't even actually done anything that really would mean that you're like tainted by association with me. But I notice you still get an equal amount of the abuse. Like you even get those classic people. My favourites, by the way, the ones who, if I post your article to Reddit, they don't read the article. They flame me for what a stupid article is, and I didn't even write it. Like that's how next level I am. I get flamed for articles I didn't even write. Like, what do you think of that? You cool with that? Have you tried? Or are you sort of like half in the Max Millett camp where you're sort of thinking about making a jailbreak and like trying to escape the event horizon of Thorin's world?
Well, I made my own show, which I'm glad this time around. Like last time you had Sam on your show, who's also on my podcast with Max. Yes. You were like, yeah, there's really no other podcast than Counter-Strike. Really, just nothing else exists out there. I mean, I don't know why anyone just doesn't make a podcast. Like this is 2 weeks after you guys both showed up, like one after the other. So
what do you get out of this symbiotic relationship? Like, I mean, you don't get any love from the Overlord. You get spanked by the community for being tainted by the Overlord. What's happening here?
Well, it's not like I choose to be in the relationship. It's just like Thorin sends me like a message every like 3 months, and then like he retweets the articles. I don't choose to do anything.
You have to realize, Moses, I'm like that fucking guy. I don't even remember his name. He's such a forgettable actor. That guy, the main actor in fucking Avatar, where I just go into their little world of like nerds who like aren't that famous but want to write about Counter-Strike and stuff. I come in and I'm like, oh, I'm an outsider. I've come to learn your ways and maybe bring you like, and I sort of like I give them some information about the outside world, but if any of them ever comes with me, it's kind of like what that movie was obviously based on, like a Pocahontas type scenario where, you know, she went back to England and she had like a terrible life and she died early. Like it's kind of like that. If they ever try to come back to the human world with me, it ends terribly for them. But as long as I just interact with them in their little, you know, fairy world or whatever, it's all cool then. So, you know, as he says, he didn't really have a choice to be retweeted by me. So basically, I just it's like I just picked someone out of the crowd and was like, "What does everyone think of this person?" And they were like, "Fuck
and
you!"
Painted a
Like,
giant target on his back. That is not ruined him forever.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Actually, the main reason I picked WallabeeBeatle out in the first place was that he actually did do some pretty good articles, and interestingly enough. It's funny because I noticed, because unfortunately Stucci was one of the first people I promoted in CSGO, I notice everyone tries to, because they don't read the fucking articles, like people on Reddit post on Reddit, that's what they do primarily. As a hobby, they occasionally watch some content. Their main task is to post on Reddit. That's why it's imperative to post on content that you haven't even watched yet, because, well, I mean, what am I going to do? Stop posting on Reddit to review content? Of course not. So the key thing is, a lot of them noticed that since Stucci obviously isn't a CSGO expert in the traditional sense, he doesn't come from CS, and he mainly, if you notice, focuses on like narrative content, because you can update that regularly, you know, you pick up the thread from something he did before, and he does a very good job of it, you know. He sort of like if you're a casual fan and you're watching this podcast, you've never heard of Stucci, and you only watch like the odd CS tournament, but you want to know the storylines, just basically go and read his articles. Like, they do a really good job of sort of like keeping the thread going and then updating it and then letting you know like the contrast, you know, but they're not going to go into like insane detail and be like 9,000 words long or whatever. But here's the thing, I'll even give it up to people who criticize Stucci on the grounds that like, because his association with Counter-Strike actually comes from me, yes, he does share some of my opinions or my way of seeing the game, etc., because that's how he came to know CSGO. But I will say it is actually mad unfair that all the other people, so Wallaby, Max, Sam, are always criticised, right, along the grounds, Moses, that they just write their articles to agree with everything I think, And in doing so, that's why people have got the cart before the horse. They think that's why I retweet the articles. Whereas, as I said on the episode, I think it's on the episode where Sam came on, like, I think Sam and Max have written some of the articles I disagree with the most in the history of CSGO articles. Like, especially Sam, because he's taken, like, all I'm going to say is this. He's one of those people where I was really worried in the early days that he was going to be a bit like Dust. Like, he would just be too afraid of confrontation. And if anyone sort of challenged him on something, he'd immediately back off. Well, the problem is, if anything, he's done the reverse, because he actually started with all these really bold opinions.
He seeks out the fights.
Yeah, and he tried to do what I do, which is you take a gamble on someone, you go, you know what, I'm actually going to say this guy's going to become a great player. This move's not going to work. His problem is almost every move he like gambled on just hit rock bottom, and like it's like the stock just crashed instantly. Like he picked like Space Soldiers to be really legit right before Cobblestone was removed. He picked fucking SK to keep winning forever or some shit. Like every move was just wrong all the way across the board, which you got to realize if you're going to be in this business, you got to just take your lumps in that way, like eventually you'll get it right, you'll get some going. And then Max, obviously, I mean, the guy literally did a video just flaming the fuck out of me, half of it completely inaccurate. And this is how you know that every now and then, Moses, there will be like sort of like a shred of humanity that makes it through the Thorin persona, because I actually did, when he wrote that, thought, you want to come at the king? Well, and I actually wrote out a script for a response video to that, which, by the way, would have absolutely obliterated that video. Like, I had video evidence of it, stuff. Like, I even had examples of where he just didn't even understand the context of, like, we don't watch the fucking Go TV demo and scroll back through it. So we don't even see some of the kills you're seeing in this video. But I actually didn't do it because I realised it doesn't actually serve any purpose. Like, all I'm doing is just wrecking someone else. Like, that doesn't really
why are you trying to get into, like, fucking esports journalist rap battles? Like, you guys are just fucking sparring each other on some weird stage.
Well, sadly, I can tell you the real reason why. This is what esports journalism used to be like before it got massive, basically, which is basically all you had was your reputation. So that's the most fiercely guarded and battled thing. And you don't come at the other guy over something else. You come at him over like, you're writing shit. Or like, you got this wrong, didn't you? I knew it'd be the other way. Like, that sort of bullshit. So anyway, along these lines, let's get into a topic that all of us are incredibly familiar with, because at the moment, everyone in CSGO is familiar with it, which is we're going to start out by talking about the Team Liquid versus Astralis matchup. Let's call it, I don't know, back and forth, rivalry. Because obviously, after seeing the EPL final, a lot of people have the sentiment, and this is the problem I think at the moment, was there are already people obviously who just don't like Astralis' style of play, and they go, it's boring. Then you have the group of people who goes, well, I just want to see a new winner. I always call those people like just morons who like to watch fireworks in the sky. Like, look, another a different name on the screen. That's good. I like different names. Like, I never understood those people, but okay, fair enough. Essentially, as far as I can tell, those people just are in denial that they're in Group 1. It's like, we know you just clearly don't like Astralis. Like, if it was your favourite team, you wouldn't be saying that, would you daft cunt? Like, I wish my favourite team would stop winning all the time, and a random team I hate win.
Also,
yeah?
If you're going to be upset that Astralis is winning every single time, the teams you're supposed to hate is every other fucking team that hasn't been able to beat them for 8 months. Like, what's everyone doing?
But the third group, which I actually think are the people who have a legitimate claim to being slightly annoyed, are the people who really, it's not even Astralis dominating, it's not no one else beating them, because obviously people do sometimes beat Astralis. It's the people who say, I don't want to see Team Liquid play Astralis again. Like, I've seen this play out over and over and over again. And what's funny is normally I would be the most against the last group, actually, because what I would normally say to someone is, that's actually a very stupid sentiment in the history of any esport I'm aware of. Because first of all, like, every time you play someone is different. Secondly, in theory, the team that's losing all the time, if they're a really good team, should actually eventually get the advantage, like, of having all these extra like, they've basically been trained to eventually beat you. And then thirdly, no one wins forever. Like, eventually, I know this might sound shocking to people, but eventually Team Liquid is going to beat Astralis. Like, it'll just happen eventually, or both teams will fall off entirely. Like, one of those two scenarios will happen. So, in the vein of the last point, let's start out by outlining some of this. Like, why do you think it is that they just never do beat them? As in the series. Yes, obviously they won that one game on Inferno at the Major, which is great and everything, but in the series, they've never done it. And it is kind of bizarre, because if you took away the results between each other and only showed people the results Astralis had against everyone else in the year, and Team Liquid against everyone else in the year, you'd actually assume Team Liquid's the most likely team to have beaten them. But obviously, they're the only top team, actually, who's never scored a win over them. And actually, generally hasn't come as close, even though this one was actually a pretty good one. You know, the two EPL finals were fairly close. What do you think the reasons for that are, Wallaby? Why do you think Team Liquid has struggled so much with Astralis?
Well, first of all, just in terms of the map pool, it's a terrible matchup. I mean, I think Astralis is, like, the maps they pick the least are least likely to pay or train and overpass. Now you can argue whether or not those are actually their worst maps, or if it's something like Mirage. But I mean that's also bad maps for Liquid, so they're not going to pick those against Astralis, so they can't get an advantage there where some other teams might be able to, like a Navi playing Train. But I think more generally, if you look at the series, I did a long article on this topic. It was like 3,400. The title was "The World's Most One-Sided Rivalry," something like that. Like, yes, why can't Liquid beat Astralis?
I'll put it in the description box if anyone's watching.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, keep going.
But basically, if you go through series by series, like the first 4 or 5 series they played, I think it's 11 series over the year now, maybe 9 with these specific lineups with Taco in the lineup on Liquid. But if you go through the first 4 or 5, it's actually very close, exciting series. Like, I enjoyed watching those and writing about that, and sort of displays the style, and there's back and forth games that Liquid are taking maps. But if you watch the second half of the series, it gets really dull really quick, which is, I think you're alluding to that in sort of the setup to this question. Like, sure. It is getting pretty boring. Like, watching them just get blasted, like best of 3 after best of 3 was really boring. What I was getting frustrated with, and what I sort of ended my article with, is, yeah, I mean, like, Liquid just don't even like attempt to do new things versus Astralis. Like, I watched one game, I think it must have been an E-League, where it was Astralis versus Liquid on Inferno, and first 4 T rounds, like, Liquid doesn't even attempt to go banana. And it actually gets to the point where, like, at the first gun round or the second gun round, Astralis make a 5-man stack A. Just completely just like, okay, they're just not even going to try banana. They have no presence. Yeah. Like, it's just completely ridiculous. Like, you know, just you see like Magic's on a nuke just go or walk around outside in the garage, like completely uncontested. First gun around on a nuke game one time, and you know, and just the pick and ban phase is the exact same thing every single. You know, they'll either first pick Mirage or Inferno depending on what they're feeling that tournament, and usually map 3 does 2 nukes. Obviously, Astralis' first ban. So I was actually really excited to see Liquid decide to change it, even if though I think Max actually did an interview where Magic's anticipated that they were going to make nuke their first ban from now on in that series. But I thought it was a really encouraging sign that they went with nuke first ban, because, I mean, if you run an experiment 7 times, I think they've played each other 7 times on nuke, and they've lost every single time. Maybe it's time to, you know, change. So and then they went on Train, which is a positive sign. And I think the latter games were more contested. I was watching those last night, and yeah, those closer games, I thought that Liquid did a better job. And I think they're stepping in the right direction. But to your general question, why do they lose every time? I think for a while there, they just weren't mentally, or I don't know what their problem was. I don't want to assign some bland philosophical or psychological prescription, but it just doesn't seem like they were even trying in those series.
I wouldn't say they weren't trying, but I think there is definitely, like, because I think up until about the Face It Major, I think most of those losses before that you can ascribe to just mental weakness, and obviously they had an improvement throughout the year. So I mean, even at the start when they lost at Star Series, when they lost in Katowice, you know, they're not quite even ready at that point to beat Astralis. They weren't quite that dangerous, deadly team that we kind of know them to be towards the end of the year. But I think the big thing was, they didn't believe they could do it. I mean, I remember some of those, the first EPL final, and it was just kind of like they just kind of had like those nervous smiles on their face, and it's like, yeah, here we go up against Astralis. Sure. We know we don't have what it takes, and I don't even think they quite realized that maybe that was an issue until later. And then obviously when we spoke to them in London at the major, that's why everyone is getting so hyped on Liquid, is because they finally said it. They finally realized it. You know, like we actually know that we can actually beat Astralis this time. Like, you know, it actually came out in the way they carried themselves in interviews and just talking and passing. From there, after that, I think Astralis is miles ahead of everyone else. And I mean, they touched on it in the post-game interviews after they won. They just won yesterday. Why can't I remember? In Denmark, in Odense. that they just have so many contingency plans. They have so many different things that they can pull out of a playbook, whether it's, putting device in different positions with the AWP, whether it's stacking up on a corner, whether it's doing a delayed retake of map control. So I think just in that sense, mentally, I think for Liquid, it's a grind. I think when they play other teams that they're able to beat them, like we saw them run through everyone at this event except for Astralis. And it's because other teams break. Like Liquid can actually break other teams mentally in a game. It's just they can't ever do it to Astralis, and I think it surprises them in a way that Astralis is still grinding and still fighting in some of these maps when they have the initial lead. And I think that's what catches them off guard more than anything. They don't seem to have that like closing killer instinct.
Sure. Well, one point that I think we can bring up there is the angle that you came with of the fact that like they didn't seem as though they wanted to contest Astralis in certain areas, Wallaby. So one thing I have to say that I think is like this is one of the things that might sound counterintuitive to people who don't know the game very well. But Team Liquid clearly plays very differently against Astralis than they play against all the other teams, which is kind of ridiculous because, for example, like even though yes, now you've lost to Astralis so many times, it's claimed that Astralis are like the #1 team and blah, 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 the better team, etc. But if you go back earlier in the year, teams like Na'Vi, teams like FaZe were at the time considered better than Team Liquid, You'd think all the same like intimidation factors should be there, still like, a better team playing you. But actually Team Liquid never really did that against any of those squads. That's why they actually have a very good record against all those teams. Like obviously the amount of times now that they've beaten Na'Vi is fucking ridiculous. Like it's actually very, very impressive. So that in itself, I mean, in some sense that has to be psychological. But then again, I also think like part of the problem with that is, like to touch on what Moses said, if you look at this tournament in particular, the sad thing is, up until the final, this was actually one of the best Team Liquid runs I think I've ever seen. They were smashing everyone. It didn't matter the map, it didn't matter the opponent. Like what was ridiculous was, this is a team that is fucking amazing at front running. And the sad thing is when you watch the final, obviously they front ran the first map, which was the one that was the most unexpected. Train won that. The second one, they were doing pretty well. And I think it was the third one, actually. They did well in the first half. But the problem is, against Astralis, they nearly are always behind because Astralis just gets ahead of everyone. Like, they're so good in that sense. And then you add the fact that you're behind in the game. I think Team Liquid plays very differently when they're behind. Like, I actually think when they're behind, they're kind of dog shit. I'm not even going to lie. Like when I say that, that's in the context of how good a team they are and where they're ranked. Like, when you look at the other top teams, like Na'Vi's pretty much spent their whole life behind. Fucking FaZe Clan, obviously, it depends on the opponent, but generally they're amazing anyway. They can come back, MIBR's even pretty solid nowadays in that sense. Team Liquid has to be one of the worst teams that play for mine, but specifically against Astralis. Like, one of the weird things about it is, like, this is where you wonder how much is psychological, how much is coaching, and how much is just like, are these players just not equipped to be champions or something? Which is, normally, when you lose enough times doing one thing, you try and at least once or twice to do, even if it's counterintuitive, the opposite. Like you try and play really risky or really aggressive and stuff. Because if you don't, surely somewhere in the back of your brain, it's like, well, if I play this out 100 times and I do the same thing, isn't the same thing going to happen most of the time? What do you say on that, Moses?
I think that it's just, I don't think it's that they're not ready to be champions. I think you have to, I'll always like looking at this, and maybe it is because I harbor a little bit of faith, more faith in Liquid than most people, but since we had this comparison over this past year of them being Astralis, remember this Astralis core was labeled the same exact thing, like, and sure. it can change. And I think you've even written an article, Duncan, about this, or maybe it was a video of if this core of Liquid that's young, like I think OllieJ is like 21, 22. Like I remember when Device and Dupree were that age or that young, and Zipmix, Dupree, and Device, they stuck together, and they were all under 20 when they started getting all these semifinal runs and started getting this string of second places. I used to see them so heartbroken. I used to see them like crying after losing some of those finals that they were in. And it's the same thing with Liquid. So, I think they can still learn to be champions. I think the problem with them specifically against Astralis, it brings me to something Freiberg told me at an after party, which is just like, you can copy and you can kind of incorporate another team's style into yours, and you can kind of copycat it and get better at it or get better as a team, but you're never going to beat that original team if you're always just kind of copying what they're doing, because they're always going to be one step ahead since they're the ones adapting and innovating. And I think that's maybe what Liquid has kind of run into, is they've gotten to the point where they seem to have incorporated so many different styles and so much theory from Australis that they don't actually know how to beat it. They've never actually looked at beating it. They've looked at becoming it, but they've never actually tried to. They don't have the solution to actually break the things that Astralis has taught them themselves. So they're kind of in this weird limbo period against Astralis specifically. But I mean, to your point as well about maybe changing up the different style, is remember when they beat Astralis in that one map at the major in that BO1, that was crazy. If you go back and watch that demo on the T side, that was like, they threw everything out the window. There was no subtlety. There was no real. I mean, that was a fun half to watch when they went up so big, is because they were just rushing everything and they were just snowballing and they were just kind of rolling over defenses. Now, when you watch them and they're trying to play these cerebral games, every once in a while you see Device just has too many like triple kill rounds. The double op setup just wrecks them apart because they're all spread across the map, and it seems like they don't ever kind of get back into that just like hyper. We are badass players that can run over a bomb site. So that's kind of scary, but I still think that they're just so close. It just comes down to how do you know what to change in this scenario if you're Liquid?
Well, there's also this interesting thing on the CT side rather than the T side, where I think the way I would think of Liquid style, if you have to make it a single point, is I think their CT side is all about making aggression in the mid round, of getting teamwork, throwing a flash, moving into a new area, trying to get a pick, right? And to Thorin's point, yeah, I think when you are behind, I think there's a lower tendency to attempt those risks and make those plays. And when your game is so centered around playmaking in the mid round, about you like sort of team based, like little microaggressions, not like crazy everyone pushes one side of a map, but just little micro things that surprise opponents to get an advantage. I think when you're behind or you're playing the best team in the world, I think you're less willing to do that. And I think sometimes, like when I was watching the games from the final from yesterday, I see them sometimes even getting down in economy and force buying and getting to that trap and then not having the utility or the confidence to do that.
I will say, I think Liquid is a very good team, a very good comeback team against anyone except Astralis. I think that is where you get to the more mental side, where they've just lost so many times that you almost do see the fight just kind of slip out of them and the way that the game is played after a certain point. Sure. But I know you guys had mentioned that you didn't think they were good comeback teams. I think they're great against pretty much everyone except Astralis.
Here's my problem. Like, if I had to generally say, like, one of the things I have, for every time I watch Team Liquid, I have this issue. It's only when they play the elite teams, by the way, versus lesser teams. I mean, they just got so much skill themselves. They can just batter anyone just on basically whatever form you're in. But whenever they play the other teams, and obviously they've beaten some of these teams, the likes of the Navis and the MIBRs, etc. Admittedly, they haven't played FaZe that many times, so that's not really much of a matchup explored. But whenever they play a match that they could be like under stress in, it's not that they don't win. Like, what's mad is they still win some of these games. But if they're behind in a game, they will sometimes take like passive CT positions, for example, where you can still win the round, but you have to headshot the guy when he comes around. Like, you're in a spot where it's like you're just holding the edge of the corner. If he comes to the edge of the corner, you both have a duel. Whoever wins that aim battle wins it. Now, in a way, that can actually be a positive. Like, against lesser teams, that's actually a pretty good way to play, because you just emphasize individual skill. If your individual skill's on, you win even if you don't have a read on them in the game. The problem with that style, though, is that, like, it's not going to work very well against teams that are like Astralis, that are adapting, and especially who actually have an edge on you anyway. Like, it's just going to make them even more comfortable. Like, I remember there was I'll give you a quick example from 1.6 that was exactly like this. So whenever in 1.6, there was actually a very good Korean team who, in the end of the 1.6, were called We Made Fox, right? They were the team that now is MVP Project. They actually, some of them still play in CSGO. And they were a very good team, actually. Like, they were on the outskirts of being like an elite team, They even made like some major finals and stuff. But one of the things that was really whack about this team, because they were over in Korea and they didn't practice against proper people, and they only came like 2 times a year to Inferno Online and played for like 1 week against good Europeans, they never had like a very strong understanding of the meta game of Counter-Strike. And so one of the flaws they had as a team is if they got behind in a game, they would just do like the most rookie positioning ever, as in, like, I'll give you an example. Say they were playing on train and someone's job was to play the Ivy position. So if people pushed him in at Ivy, he would just drop back to the corner that watches Ivy. And if people pushed onto the corner at Ivy and he wasn't dead, he would pull back to the ramp. And if people pushed it on there, he would pull back to the spot. Now, the problem in that scenario is, in his brain, he's thinking, well, if I hit the shot on the guy who comes on the corner at Ivy, then he's dead. Oh, I missed. Right, I'll set up the next shot, which is when he comes on this corner. What he doesn't realize is if you do that every time, it becomes not only predictable, but you can exploit that even more if you're like an aggressive team. So, for example, one of the teams that used to be very successful against them was the Polish team, because they already played like a really aggressive style of terrorist play anyway. And so they would just abuse that style. And I'm not joking. It didn't matter how well this Korean team did. Even if they got to, like, 12 rounds in a game, you just knew they were going to lose because of this factor, because they would play out those scenarios again and again and again. And even though sometimes you do kill the guy and you win the round off it, if terrorists know, as a general principle for anyone who's new to Counter-Strike, if terrorists know where you are at a bomb site, you're in a really bad spot, because as a CT you have a worse gun anyway. You die in less, you die much quicker. They have utility that they can use. It's like one of the main things about being CT is you have to try and make it a surprise as to where you are, and that has to be consistently like a rule, to even out the fact they have AKs and cheaper economy, etc. So, like, it's not a hard and fast rule across all teams, but against Astralis, I've noticed like they have a real problem with that in general. I also noticed, by the way, if you go back and watch when they lost to FaZe in the semi-final at Epicenter, it was the exact same thing. Like, they could win rounds if they shot everyone in the head, but if they didn't, and they ever got like pushed out of a site and they had to retake or pushed off a spot, they basically just, like, it was death by 1,000 cuts. They would just give up ground after ground after ground after ground, and by the time you then lose the round at the end, this is the reason why I think it's tough to battle, is at the end of the round when you lose, well, you're in a bad spot, so yeah, you should lose in that scenario. You go, well, there's nothing I could do. It's like, yeah, but why did you let yourself get put in that position? Because think about the teams that have beaten Astralis, right? So this even applies to Liquid in the final here. Like, a point I made on Reddit after, I'm trying to think whose article it was. I think maybe Max's interview with Zipnix or something, the interview with Magus, the one you referenced actually was where he was talking about the fact that they actually thought that maybe they would pick Train. Well, one of the points I made was, since everyone's been saying this for months, like, why doesn't Liquid just ban Nuke and pick Train? And I've already told people the reason why they don't, because Train is their permaban and they're actually really good at Nuke, so that doesn't actually make that much sense. But the reason why in this one incident it actually did sort of make sense as a like one-off joker, like, I personally wouldn't do it again. Here's why it did make sense as a one-off. If you look at the teams that Astralis has lost to, so they lost to Na'Vi, and the most famous example of them losing to Na'Vi was obviously the ESL Cologne one, where actually Na'Vi played in a way that you could never predict. So they pushed past loads of utility, didn't play a very like standard Na'Vi game, and Zeus dropped like 30 kills. Like, you're not prepared for any of those things. Then consider who they lost to after that. They lost to a North lineup that had never played a tournament before, and in fact only lasted 2 tournaments. Like, that was a brand new lineup. You have no data to go off with that. You don't know what the fuck it's going to be like with MSL Open. There's no demos to go off for that. Then you look at more recently, they lost to FaZe Clan, who has Nico in game leading, so you have to throw out loads of the FaZe demos before, like 2 events before that. The MIBR one I'll give you is not really counts, but then again, the MIBR was one of the closest losses they ever had. Like, the maps that they lost were incredibly close. Like, if you apply that to this one here, here's the key reason why I think the Train Gambit worked this time around. Because bizarrely, even though Train is the permaban of Liquid, they have played it earlier in the year, and they're decent on it. They're just not a good team on it. So, bizarrely, it's one of the only teams I've ever seen who could actually, in theory, play their permaban. But more importantly, you have no demos on it on LAN for something like, I would say, at least 3 or 4 months. So as a result,
if Astralis E-League.
Exactly. If Astralis even sees that you play them out, well, they have nothing recent to go off. So you actually have the perfect surprise scenario. But that'll only work once, in my opinion, or maybe twice. I don't think you can do that. Like, you can't just do that next time and think it's going to work. Not least because actually Astralis is pretty decent on Train themselves.
No, but I don't think you can go back to Nuke. I don't think they've played them so many times in Nuke at this point. And that's the worst part, is Liquid actually is very, very good on the map. They could probably beat 90% of the pro scene, and except when it comes to Astralis. If I'm Liquid, I'm not challenging Astralis for their Nuke record. I'm looking at Train as a map that you just won, and I'm looking at the weakness that Astralis has shown recently in Overpass with some of the losses that they've took to the most recent blast, I think it was. And I think they dropped, like 3 three overpass matches on land straight too. But I think you look at those two maps, and I mean, those are the slight weaknesses that you might want to be leaning on. And again, at BO5, they could have gotten to overpass, and that would have been really cool to watch. They just weren't able to make it all the way there. I believe it was the final map in that series. But yeah, I mean, the map thing is a huge issue. I think they're right there. One thing I noticed when I watch Liquid play, especially maybe this is some recency bias, but I've never seen Team Liquid lose so many outrageous clutches, like the 1 versus 4, 2 versus 4s, 2 versus 5s. And I know Astralis is very, very good at that, and they're always going to at least cause damage. But I am so amazed by how many times Astralis is able to win rounds like that against Liquid. Just like, considering how good Liquid is in all different aspects of the game. Like, why do they just, whatever reason, drop the ball against Astralis?
On that exact topic, I'll give you a perfect example of the bubble that pro players live in, where it's just about them, their team, and what they want, right? So in the very same interview I'm referring to, the Magisk one that he did with Max Millett, and it's on, what site is it actually? Is it on ESPN? I think it's, yeah.
I think it was ESPN.
In that interview, he actually complains about them losing fucking the train game, implying that like Astralis should or could have won. And this is the most mental part. And he even says like, we lost some rounds we shouldn't have, including a 4v2. Right. Child, please. In this very series, you know how many fucking 2v4s Astralis won? Not to mention, you have a player on your team who is infamous for winning like 1v4s. Like, how could you ever dare to say that? Like, we should have won this round because we have a man advantage, right? Delete Zipnix's whole fucking career then, Magisk. What are you talking about, you idiot? That's like saying, well, you know what? The other thing is, we lost one of those maps because I got killed through a smoke. And quite frankly, I think it's cheap when people kill people through smoke. Anyway, Gleb, what do you think? Like, fucking, is this for real? Like, how can you complain about that? Like, you are Astralis. What are you talking about?
I mean, anyway, when you win everything, you got to find something to bitch.
It's true. I know. You got to. To be fair, if he went the other way, like, it's just easy, isn't it? Just don't give a fuck.
That would have been the next level.
But there's something interesting with Liquid. I think like there's that final versus Mousesports where I think there was something what you were talking about before with the Korean teams where they're just like not even like I feel like their mindset is, well, we have to find the perfect scenario. Yes. We're waiting for the perfect opportunity. And that's sort of what I thought when I was writing the article, watching them do the exact same pick and ban over and over. Like sooner or later, this is just going to fall on our lap, right? They're not willing to take that extra step. And I think that's sort of why they don't always have success in these end of these games when they are down. I'm not sure I agree with their super clutch because I think they regress more towards non-risk taking or bland, not especially interesting play when their backs are against the wall. I think they have that tendency to just like, okay, well, we'll just wait and sooner or later something will happen for us when, nothing could happen if you're playing one of the best teams that don't make mistakes like Astralis.
On that like line of thinking though, that's actually one area where this will sound bizarre because obviously like Liquid has no problems with aggression against other teams and they play very well against pretty much every other team in the world. But actually, if you look at the makeup of the players in their team and what they like have naturally gravitated towards in their careers, right? OllieJ is a very stationary player. Like he is someone who, until he was forced to at one point in time in the early Team Liquid. And then he didn't have to do it as much more recently. He's not someone who's going to be like the super aggro player. I know Twists has the aim to do it, but this is a guy who literally used to have a rep as a fucking beta. He used to just sit on the side of the map and just bait everyone. Nitro can be an aggressive player. And actually, I think Liquid's at their best when he goes fucking ham entry fragging, quite frankly. I've noticed that he goes away. He does terribly against
We've been singing that story for like 3 years though, Duncan. with Nitro.
I mean, I don't expect him to be a star player, but like, for example, if you watch any of the odd maps where he has like a really good T side, like it just opens the whole game up, like they're almost unbeatable when that happens. Taco is obviously someone who can be an entry player, but he's never going to frag everyone's head off Nico style, and he is generally a complementary piece. And then Naf, actually, I think is like a fairly passive player for a star player as well. He's another guy who just uses angles and tries to shoot people in the head. So while this doesn't apply to anyone else, this is why it's such an interesting conversation, because Liquid against Astralis is just unlike everything else. If you look at what people are going to revert to in terms of like their natural comfort level, all of them actually tend to revert to more passive style. And in fact, it's funny because this is something that ties into what you said before, Moses, is that angle that I brought up of like contrasting Astralis against Team Liquid. Well, one of the interesting details, and people only know this in the context of Device's career, because I've mentioned it many times, because I think it's a very salient point, is that you can literally track in Device's career how good he is in the game by how much, whenever I talked to him behind the scenes, he claimed he was actually a star player. Like when he told me in the early, oh, don't call me a star player. Like, you know, my team's got a lot of good players and we're all supposed to do our job, you know, and I'm not actually the best player even, you know, maybe like KGB's better or whatever. Like when he used to say that, well, he was right. In the game, he wouldn't be the star player, he wouldn't carry the game, he wouldn't be the MVP of the tournament, and they wouldn't win the tournament. As it started to get so that he was like, yeah, you know, like I actually am like putting in some work on like sports psychology stuff. Like maybe I do have a problem, and you know what? Yeah, I'm taking more responsibility. I'm not joking. He like got better and better, and he became an MVP candidate. He became, you know, and it's like he actually had to learn eventually that like if you are one of the reasons why I personally think people should step forwards and kind of be like, this is my team, as it were, is because it's not actually a selfish thing if you do it in the right way. You're taking responsibility. You say like, you know what, it's my job to actually get it done here. Like I'm supposed, like give me resources in the game and I will deliver. That's a great mentality to have because it shows that you have confidence, that you can have leadership as a player. Like I have to say that's one area where I think Team Liquid still does lack a little something. It reminds me of the old Dignitas TSM teams in the past. Like one of the sad things about them is if you go over the last few finals they've had, like Twists was fucking amazing in that ESL final against Mousesports, but they lost. OllieJ was very good actually in this final against Astralis here. Earlier in the year, NAF was the best player. But you notice they can't do it all at the same time. It's like one person takes a turn, I'm going to be the MVP of this event. Not literally, but like in terms of how it actually plays out. The next one, he's back to, you know, he has a bad game and the other guy has a game like that. Whereas you look at Astralis, like they can rotate talent like that, but they always get so many people who perform well in these matches.
But this is where you start getting into areas outside of Counter-Strike, and you say that just as a team and as an organization and as professionals, this is why it's so important, because Astralis is the only team that really does it, you know, right. They're the only team that has these kind of professional standards set up. And if you look at maybe the second portion of, you know, from maybe right around or right before New York, maybe right after the major on, Liquid's had a lot of those issues outside of the game. You know, they had that period where Zeus had to be back in Brazil. They've had some of the same situation with Taco at different times that have prevented them from practicing. Twist with all of his health issues. So I don't want to use those as an excuse as to why they play bad. There are definitely reasons that kind of, you know, feed into that. But you don't ever hear about those issues with Astralis because they do kind of get everything handled. They make sure they have time off by skipping events to be able to get your health issues done. They make sure to be having time at home where they can kind of refresh themselves and think about things and do something else. And I think there's a lot of other teams that don't do that quite yet that are going to benefit from it once they decide to go that route. But it does take a certain level of professionalism, and that has been one of my criticisms of Liquid since day one, is exactly what you brought up, where if you're going to have OllieJ or Twist be the star, like, you know, remember back in the day, we used to see those depressing tweets out of Twist every single time they lost. And like, that's not the attitude you can have. And OllieJ definitely isn't that guy. Zeus and Taco have the biggest personalities and the biggest attitude of anyone on that team. So you do need someone to step up. You know, it is funny seeing NAF get a 1 versus 3 win and then not even crack a smile. But at some point, you're going to need someone who's going to be in the interviews and be like, I'm the guy of this team. And I always thought it would be OllieJ, and maybe it's going to be Twist. But I still think, you know, for him to take that step, I think that's where he's got to look at his health issues that he's been pretty public about and get that under, you know, figured out and straightened out, and then he can be the guy.
Like, that's actually where, this will sound like a weird tangent to take it, because I'm not actually, on the face of it, suggesting a roster move. This is just in the abstract of talking about the player types, etc. This is where, I mean, it's bizarre because obviously their team works great against every other team in the scene. And actually, ironically, they do it by playing a very non-North American style of play. That's why people call them mini Astralis. Like, in theory, except for when they play Astralis, they're doing everything fucking great. They're doing a really great job. And they're playing a style that we've never seen someone consistently do for about a decade in North America, maybe more. So the sad thing is, for everyone else, they're doing it right. But against Astralis, I almost wish they had like Stewie 2K, Tarek, players who actually want to just every now and then basically just push the fucking chaos button and just do some fucked up shit. That might not work, but if you're in a game that you're losing anyway, sometimes you got to do that. Like that can actually be a viable way out of it. Because I have to tell you, if you go and look at teams who are very tactical in history, this is why Counter-Strike is such a fascinating game to me, because not much changes about the game engine. It leaves the meta game so wide open that you get these cycles where you have the tactical team rises up. Well, we all know, if you've watched enough CSGO history, or Counter-Strike history in general, the team that eventually fully dethrones a really tactical team is never another really tactical team. It's a team that has like amazing loose style, and therefore you can't read them, or they do different things all the time, or they have a star player who can just create something out of nothing all the time. That's why, actually, in a mad way, I'm not that surprised, kind of, that like Navi's beaten Australis a few times. Like, they've got the star players to do it. People can do anything, you know.
I know from just hearing some green room talk in Dallas when we were there, the Astralis guys always just laughing every time they play Navi now, because they don't know. Like, Navi does that kind of shit. There's some of those games that they've won. If you go back and watch the demo, as Charles has told me, like, they'll just decide to stack a part of the map that doesn't make any sense. Like, they haven't gathered any information, they haven't seen or heard anything, and Astralis makes their play, and all of a sudden there's 4 people in that spot, and they're just like, how the fuck are we supposed to know what to do? Like, how are we supposed to read this if you're just going to roll the dice, 4 times a half? Eventually you're going to get enough that go your way to really be crippling. So, I mean, that's what they're dealing with now, is people who are just like, yeah, we don't really know what to do to beat them, so we're just going to start gambling. And if it turns out right, we're going to win. If it turns out wrong, we're going to lose. And it's like, how do you combat that? You can't. It's just a roll of the dice.
Well, yeah, Thorin's point earlier was really good. Like, what are the teams that have beat them ever? Eliminated from a tournament. FaZe, Navi, and North, who's playing a much looser style than they normally do, or much more focused around individual plays and playmaking. And it didn't have any data on it. So there's not been a team like a Big or a North back when they had their old roster, or Team Liquid, obviously, who've been able to, as a similar team to Astralis, overtaken Astralis.
I think the funny thing, when we have this conversation, the worst part about this is if you go to Liquid, and no matter how many theories or how many different ideas you have as to why they're not able to win or beat Astralis, that Mousesports loss in New York is so heinous, because that just ruins every single thought you can have. Be like, oh, they're great against everyone else, but they just mentally just can't handle Astralis. And then it's like, oh, you lose to a limping Mousesports at a grand final that has Snacks, that made that team look awful, and all of a sudden you've lost that. So it's like, okay, maybe it's not Astralis, maybe it's just finals in general. So it's super weird. And just for my own peace of mind, I usually just wipe that Mousesports loss out of memory, just because it makes it easy. Like, how am I supposed to come up with a good idea if that Mousesports loss just sits there just to flick me off for every single time I have an idea?
This is why, though, I said that line that was like, I don't know if they are ready to become a champion, because here's the problem, right? On the one hand, I will say, as much as it might sound bizarre, the very fact that at ESL New York, Epicenter, everyone is telling you, well, no Astralis this time, so you guys can win, is like, that's going to add a psychological pressure of its own if you're someone who has any sort of ability to buckle under too much pressure on yourself. But the reason why that's not an excuse is because it's like, okay, the same thing happened, in League of Legends, where in League of Legends, someone was trying to be an apologist for the team TSM, which was always traditionally the best North American team, but then whenever they went to the World Championship, they would always shit the bed pretty much, right? And he was saying, well, you have to understand, if you play for TSM, there's a lot of pressure on you, more pressure than other teams. And I was like, you are aware that they're trying to be the #1 team, right? Like, what fucking universe would you be in where being on the #1 team, getting paid the most, and being expected to win is like a bad thing? Isn't that supposed to be what you want if you want to be a champion? Like, that's why I never understood that angle, that pro players in 2018 still think it's like an enlightening comment to be like, I prefer to be an underdog. Well, no shit, moron. Like, that's because no one could be an underdog who's the 3rd best team in the world, could they? Like, you're never going to get that opportunity. Like, it doesn't make any sense. What you're basically saying is like, I wish I had all the same skills and just as good a team, but the other teams didn't prepare for me and they sort of took me easy. Like, great, well, what an amazing insight that is when I reframe it like that. It sounds like utter shit, doesn't it? Like, move along, let someone else talk. Like, it's just garbage, isn't it? So in that scenario, the reason why I say you can't really kind of take that one as an excuse is because they should have won these tournaments. Like, and they should obviously have won that year. So, if they were indeed going to be the great team. Because I agree with you, Moses. If it had really been that they'd only played Astralis, I was kind of an apologist who was on that bullshit hype train of like, you know what? if Australis hadn't existed, this might be the Team Liquid era. But like, after seeing Epicenter and ESL New York, I actually want to go back in time, pop out of a time machine and go, shut the fuck up. And then just go back to myself even. Literally do Thorin versus Thorin in using time travel technology, because that turned out to be bullshit. That was just a narrative, I have to say, sadly.
That mouse
like, you know, all those,
so bad.
Dude, the worst was when people were like, but they won the Supernova event. The curse is broken. What curse is that? Playing NRG in fucking LAN finals, you daft cunt. I'm pretty sure they would have about 10 titles if they did on that every time. What is it? That one didn't even make sense. Right, what about this, though? So we've, like, spitballed it a bit. Do you actually think that there are... Because here's one aspect I wanted to ask you about, actually. The reason why I do put a lot of it down to psychological factors is, you know how rare it is that one team on any level beats another team this consistently? Like, usually, if teams can even meet that often in a tournament, even teams that are like, you know, first place versus seventh, eventually seventh is going to win a fucking game. It's actually outrageous how few games Team Liquid's won and how few maps they've even won in these series, you know. It's kind of wild. So, like, that's one of the reasons why initially I didn't blame them for, like, letting Nuke come through all the time, playing the same, picking Inferno every time. Like, people have to realise, on paper, Team Liquid should eventually beat now Astralis on Nuke. Team Liquid is one of the best teams in the world on Inferno. It doesn't matter that Astralis is slightly better. Eventually, they should win these maps. Like, the fact that they never win these maps, generally, I mean, they've done it like once with Inferno, in itself is very bizarre. Like, I'm not even sure what it's indicative of, because it obviously saying psychological problems is just a massive umbrella for some really complicated shit none of us are qualified to really talk about. So, it's kind of a cop-out in a way, but you have to do it because I don't know what else you put it down to, right?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that's like the idea that like, oh, we should just keep doing this experiment again and again. It's like what problem they ran into with the Mousesports game. I think they should have at least. I think definitely at E-League when they just made Train their permaban, they could have tried to first ban Nuke and then tried to play Train, right? Like, because that's still more fresh in their minds. And I think after like 3 or 4 consecutive like win 5 rounds in a best of 3 series, they should have tried something. I mean, how long are you gonna wait for this? It's been like what, 9 months since they've beaten Astralis. Like, maybe at some point they should try something. I definitely think they should have changed something faster than this, and I think it's a good sign that they are that they did try the first ban of Nuke. Maybe that chance that surprise won't work the next time, but I think it's a good mentality shift that they are trying new stuff rather than just waiting.
I don't know if that's a mentality shift as much as it's like, well, guys, we've been destroyed doing everything else. We've got this one last trick that we can try. That's more of kind of what it feels like. I think, you know, one area where we haven't really touched on is one of the reasons why Liquid isn't able to beat Astralis is, I mean, you just kind of have to say it, is the lack of like a real opper. The lack of like a real op who can. I know Nitro had a good event here where he provided a lot of opening kills. That's not been the case with the AWP for every other tournament they've been part of. And even with that kind of success, the opping style that he brings out is not like a traditional opping style that can actually provide a lot more that we see from other teams with the real pure oppers, or from the device who's that mobile and that studied.
What tilts me about that, right, is I actually saw, this is one of the few times I'll ever reference a random moron on Reddit just saying something, because generally I try not to, like you notice I remove the names even in Thorin vs. because I don't want to actually give them any fame, you know, but I'll for once reference it because it's relevant to what you were saying now, right, which is, now that Team Liquid's had this amazing year, someone did make a comment either on Reddit or Twitter that was along the lines of like, ha, and you said after the E-League Season 2 finals that NAF would never perform like this again. Like, first of all,
I saw
you know
that,
what?
yeah.
I'm absolutely happy to cop the loss on that one, because guess what? Yeah, I couldn't predict NAF would get like 3 times better and become one of the best players in the world. No, guess what? I couldn't predict that, actually. I don't claim to be psychic. I don't really know what the implication is for you, if that's a criticism. Like, you're just psychically predicting stuff. But okay, ignoring that for a second, the reason why it's a relevant point, though, is because, you know what? I'd fucking love to see that NAF when he plays versus Astralis. He ain't doing that shit. That was the NAF that dropped like 33 kills on Overpass and was fucking open and was taking over the game. Where's that guy when he plays Astralis? That's one of the things I hate about NAFly, actually, is because he's a hybrid player, he does exactly the style of hybrid play. That is why you shouldn't call hybrid players the best AWPers if they are true hybrids, because true hybrids just wait until they like feel like it's the right opponent and they got the first 2 kills with the AWP, and then they use the AWP for the whole half. Like, that's not AWPing. AWPing in Counter-Strike, because it's the most expensive gun and all your setups are based on the AWPer, requires a lot of resources and planning, and like you have to know this guy's going to AWP in the game. When Naf is in a game, I saw him do this against Mousesports, where it's going badly, he either just doesn't AWP, or, I mean, in the case of the Mousesports game, there was one point where he was just AWPing like an idiot, like actually just like actively moving into people's fucking AWP crosshair getting killed. So, like, I'd love to see that guy turn up. Like, for me, he's the obvious person who could go off in these finals, and I know he did half decently in this one, but because he's so versatile, he could be a massive game changer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just super difficult in general. I think Astralis is one of the best teams in the world at shutting down very, very. I feel like there's very few like crazy individual performances that propel teams to win. We've seen a couple of them. That Zeus one is like a weird outlier as well, but generally they don't get beat much by just an individual. Do they? And Liquid is the same way. Liquid's very good at shutting down the team stars, except just once again, just not against Astralis for whatever reason. So. Yeah, I mean, Naf, obviously, he's the culprit, I guess, if you look at that New York final. Like, I think that was the series. Was that the grand final where he was just absolutely absent? I know Twist had one of those at one of the previous events that they were in. Everyone here seemed to do okay, all things considered, despite how much of a battering that was in the last 3 maps. But yeah, I think if you just get to the question, you get to a point, and I think this is what kind of scared me with this Liquid lineup for the past 2 months is how many of these losses can they actually take? Like, I think everyone was impressed for the most part that the Danes, that Astralis, even that core even stuck together after all the heartbreaking defeats that they've had over the years. And I think you have to look at the Liquid ones and be like, are they going to be, they're not as constrained by culture as maybe Denmark is, as staying as the 5 best Danish players. You don't have to do that if you're an American or Canadian. You can go to another team. You can go to a mixed team. You have MIBR, obviously. You can go to and try and join one of these phase type teams popping up, one of the Mousesports. That's going to happen eventually. But for Liquid, it's like, I guess your plan, if you're Liquid, has got to be keep the roster through the major, and then kind of decide what to do from there. If anyone wants to leave, I don't kind of know what the idea would be, but I am at the point now where, despite how good I think Liquid is, and despite them being the blatant number 2 team in the world, in my opinion, I don't know how many losses like this they can suffer before they just say enough's enough.
Well, it's interesting with talking about roster moves. Like, you were talking earlier about how negative and sort of hard on themselves they can be. Like an obvious name you would mention for a roster move would be Taco, right? Just simply because he has the lowest numbers, because that's just the role he plays, and he's not like the most sick player individually. But I mean, I don't know the guy. I don't have interesting conversations in green rooms that other people might have. But he seems like a very positive force on that team. Like, he's an upbeat person, and say okay, you make an upgrade to someone who could play more anchoring CT roles, you get Greb automatic. Onto Liquid, right? I mean, I saw an interview with you, Thorin, where Automatic saying like he lost all trust with nothing because he didn't wait for him after when he was going to the bathroom at an airport. Like, I don't know if he's the most positive force on a team that you can have.
What is this?
See, something like he didn't. Like, they went.
Jordan didn't wait for him in the toilet after
like he went
pissing?
to the bathroom, and they just went ahead to the check-in to the. When you change countries, what is that called?
Customs.
Immigration.
Border control. Customs.
Yeah, border controls. They just went in line without him, and he's like, "Well, I'm done with nothing. He's just not a good teammate."
That's fucking awesome.
It's mad, isn't it?
I don't know these guys. You know, but that's
I will say
to take hard losses.
Yeah. I will say Taco's I think is super important to that Liquid lineup. See, the only person, if we're going to get into the hypotheticals of roster changes, which sometimes isn't fair, but I think the only one that would make sense to kind of look at first would be Nitro. And it's not because I think he's bad at what he does, and it's not that I think he does a bad job or that he's a bad player, but as someone who is, an in-game leader and an upper, those are like the two areas which you would identify, especially at AWP, and upgrade and say, we want to upgrade. So you'd want to go after an AWPer of some kind. And maybe it wouldn't be Nitro leaving the team. Maybe it would be someone else and he just kind of slots over to a more natural role. But, those are two kind of roles. And I think he's gotten much, much better at in-game leading, obviously. But if you're going to have kind of like half attention on in-game leading, half on AWPing, you almost need that AWPer to be just fully focused. So that'd be where I'd look to if Liquid's going to make any kinds of a roster change. But again, I don't think it would happen until after the major. I think this team will beat Astralis soon. I don't know. Why am I even going there, Duncan? Why have I done that? Soon can be so many different things.
The problem is people won't realize this because actually, like, some of this does tie into if you know players personally, and you get the update on what they thought of a match. The bizarre thing is, it's not even like teams that have lost a lot and mentally think we can never win. Like, that's not even true. Like, I've even known teams, no joke, where, in fact, actually, I'm trying to think if I can give an example of this. I'm trying to think if there's any that, like, legit that someone wouldn't mind. Okay, I'll tell you one that I don't think the guy would mind, actually. I'm pretty sure, 99% sure this guy wouldn't mind. But before CLG had that run at Star Series in 2017 at the event that FaZe won over Astralis, when they had that run where they made the playoffs and everyone was like, what the fuck, how did this happen? Like, it was very unexpected. Yeah. If you remember, Ricky made some sort of comment where he made some sort of Twitter banter, like, I'm going to fuck this team up tomorrow. I can't remember if he was talking about Astralis or another team, but he made like, kind of like a funny comment like that. And it sounded like, wow, he's really confident. And we actually did meet him outside the event before he played like the next game. And we were like, wow, you really meant all that? And he was like, nah, I was just joking when I said that. Like there actually aren't that many people who really believe that. But the funny thing is, it doesn't really seem to matter in the game, because obviously the game doesn't really give a fuck how you feel as long as you actually click on heads and shoot people. So what's funny is that's probably the most astounding part of this, is that somehow Liquid just never even accidentally wins. I mean, one thing that's really, really bizarre, I have to say, is how does Astralis never have a bad game against Team Liquid? Like, Astralis has bad games. I know they have done it a lot less than people maybe ever, but I've seen them play, obviously IEM Chicago the whole run except the final pretty much. They were having all sorts of problems. They were looking very weak. You go look at DreamHack Stockholm, they have all sorts of holes all over the place. True, they fix these problems. True, they course correct. Yes, they've got a deep roster. Like, all these things are great, but they never have the bad game against Team Liquid though. Like, Team Liquid never catches a break in that sense. So every now and then, the other team beats the team themselves for you, right?
No, that is the best part. Is like, if you play this much, it does feel like you would just accidentally have a victory at some point. Like, Astralis would drop a bomb back in T-spawn at least once and forget to plant it, and that would be the round that you needed to win the game. Whatever, like there would be some kind of fuck up, and it just never happens. And the funny thing is, Liquid as a team is very aware of that. I think I can't recall. I think that was at Chicago where they said that to me after the final, was just like, why don't we ever get a shitty Astralis? Yes. And but the funny thing is, they kind of did during this finals. They kind of did on Barrage. That was a game that I thought actually at a certain point, it felt like Liquid should have won that. They had everything you could have wanted, right? They had Device having a terrible game with the AWP, and actually to the point where when they bought the AWP, they dropped it over to Dupree. Device just said, fuck it, it's not my game, I don't want it. And they still managed to win. Dupree still did an admirable job with the AWP. Glaive obviously dropped like 30 kills. But this is the thing, and Liquid, again, just to go back to it, Liquid has this too, is these teams are so deep that they have so many different players who can do well. If you're Liquid, you can have Nitro having an incredibly impactful game that carries you. OllieJ, Twist, Naf can all carry the game individually. If you go over, I mean, even Taco can have very, very good games, especially in terms of impact. And it's the same thing with Astralis. All 5 players can deliver, and there's not a whole lot of teams that have that luxury. MIBR doesn't have it. Navi definitely doesn't have it. FaZe doesn't have it. So, I mean, these two teams at the top right now, and it's just Liquid just haven't found that recipe to get over this one team. They beat every other demon this year. So it is just kind of freaky. Yep.
Plus, I will say this, like, if someone asked me as like an abstract concept, so forgetting Team Liquid for a second, what would you do against a team who's beating you every time? And as a tactical team, one thing I would actually say against most tactical teams, so you know what, this might work against, for example, like Big Clan, for example, because they don't have the most insane firepower in the world. If you were losing to that team consistently, I would actually tell you, you want to make the game as chaotic as possible, right? And so one way you could do that is on CT side, have a bunch of your players, like, off practice other spots on the map, and then do a legit rotation. So on certain key rounds, they don't know which CTs they're going to face. So they're going to play as they're going to face a certain team. The problem with that is, even as you're thinking that through, the one team that's probably not going to work against is Astralis, because their utility usage is so good that if you don't know what their specific protocols are for what smokes are going where and what flashes are going anywhere, that would probably make it even worse. Like, you'd probably be even less likely to win on your CT side if you did like that switch up like that, because it's already hard enough to have watched their demos, remember what they do. Plus, this is probably the most underrated aspect of Australis, is I even fall into this trap myself. For example, say a team wins a map 9 out of 10 times. You think to yourself, well, of course they're going to win the next time. They always win this map. But what you don't realise is you've actually shown everyone loads of stuff that you do that works on that map, so people should have a very good sense of how you generally play. And more importantly, other people can prepare something for you that you haven't yet faced because you haven't lost yet. And therefore, the surprise factor is actually primed for you to lose on that map. That's why no one does go, except for Astralis on Nuke, 20-0 on maps. It doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how good you are on maps. It just doesn't happen. Well, the bizarre thing about the Astralis team is that, and people don't credit, is that it's not like they... Like, the reason why I hate people talking about, oh, people are studying our demos now, we're a top team. Yeah, if you're a top team, you're supposed to study your own demos and change them. Like, you don't wait for them to beat you to change them. So the maddest thing about Australis to me is people act as though this is the same tournament being played 10 times in a row. It's not. We have knowledge of the last 9 tournaments. Like, they have to update everything they're doing. They have to come with something new to keep winning all these Nuke games and to keep winning games on maps like Inferno that everyone's seen them play a fucking bazillion times. That's the craziest thing about Australis. Isn't like the level they got to and getting a #1. It's that the reason they never drop off is they like have a new playbook all the time. It's ridiculous. Like, sure, the core of it stays the same, but they always have like a new twist on something or a new variant that if you'd seen the last 5 times you did it, you'd actually be wrong if you did the counter to that, you know. They've prepared like a molly that goes to that spot you'd go to. Like, that's exactly also where it's so hard to even theory craft a way to beat them.
Well, I think the strengths of Astralis on Nuke aren't just like, okay, they have the best strats. Like, yeah, there's certain strats that will come up again and again if you watch a lot of their demos. Like, you know, certain tendencies, certain plays will come up, and maybe you can even predict like, oh, maybe this is like they'll do that like low buy upper rush this round, like the force buy. Like, maybe you can predict some of this stuff, but the fundamental strengths, I think, you know, really come out on Nuke specifically, and there's really no way to. You can't like erase that. That's not just like, oh, well, they've come up with one genius smoke that allows them to win 27 games. Like, no, it's like their ability to, I think their strength as a team on that map is specifically their T side. And it's their ability to, I think, mess with rotations, to get outside, to confuse the opponent, to, you know, I think there's nothing just like that is repeatable. You know, play mind games, you know, do one strat 4 times in a row and then do something completely else, catch someone off guard. I don't think that you can study. It's how Astralis manipulates their opponent rather than how they manipulate the map. And I think those strengths come across on Nuke specifically, especially well.
I think there's no other team that has understanding of the game and of map control. I think the game sense of all 5 players on Astralis is so deep across all 5 players as well as individually. And I think they all think about it in the same way. So their decisions are very instantaneous, aren't they? They are the best mid-round team we have. And remember, the other previous team who was the best team in the world while also being the best in the mid-rounds was Fnatic with Pronax. That was their big claim to fame, was they were just so good at finding the right answer between, you know, the 30-second and, or, you know, 20 seconds on the clock and 1 minute mark. They just knew exactly which moves to make. So you add into that, you know, with Astralis, the best opening probably of any team in Counter-Strike with Dupree and Device. Those guys are incredible at finding openings. You have the best closer in Zibnix, and you have the best mid-round in Glaive. So the team is just really, really well-rounded. And on top of that, Nuke specifically, I think most of their domination is just because the opponents are weak. They have a very, very good Nuke. But I think there's just so many teams that don't know how to handle vertical rotations, and Astralis seems to have mastered that, much in the same way that NIP and Virtus Pro have done in the past, that have always made them dangerous on that map. I think there's a lot of this, and this isn't to take anything away from Astralis because it's incredible, but there is, and I kind of joked about this at the beginning of the show, you have to have a certain amount of discipline in the rest of the professional scene of Counter-Strike to be allowing such domination for this long to go on.
Sure.
Like, you have to look at every other team and be just like, what are you guys doing? How have you not changed the way you practice? How have you not changed the way you prepare? How are you allowing Astralis to go 25 wins straight on Nuke? How are you allowing them to win this many events out of this many tries? Like, is anyone going to have a spine? And I think part of the issue is you have so many teams going to so many different events. It does come down to the schedule where, you know, remember last year on Cologne, we were questioning whether Astralis makes the right choice of taking this event off. And I think now we're seeing the rewards being reaped is when they take these events off, it's doing them more good than it would be going to every single one, because they do get to practice. They do get to chill. They're not going to lose their top ranking until someone fucking beats them consistently. But you have to look at every other team. Not, you know, you have to look at Liquid, certainly, although they've given it their fair share of shots. You have to look at FaZe. You have to look at Navi, you have to look at MIBR and say, you know, we know some of you guys are in a transitional period, but how has no one stepped up to the plate to be able to challenge this team seriously in any way? And that's disappointing.
There's a certain meta brilliance to Astralis, not beyond the in-game brilliance. Like, yeah, like you're talking about, skipping events is obviously seen to be pretty beneficial for them. But I mean, if you think about how they situation their map pool, I think having Nuke as their like specialist pick is really brilliant. Like you're saying, like not a lot of teams play that map. Almost no teams specialize in that map. It's like historically been the most unpopular map in the pool. It was reworked right at the start of the year, so it sort of plays differently than it played previously. So no one was a master of it. Mousesports, who played it at the end of 2017, weren't playing it at the beginning of 2018. So it's the perfect map to like have one of these runs. And the fact that Astralis map, you could say, would be like Inferno Mirage, but I mean, it's hard to be a specialist in that map when it's so widely played and cookie cutter, right? So I think like the fact that it's a great pick, and it's just a great example of how Astralis are advanced.
Oh, one thing I will say is, like, one of the interesting things, I actually think this is it. What's funny is, I agree with you, Moses. Like, Nuke is kind of a whack map to have the streak of like 28 wins in a row on, because it's the map that most people in the scene don't like, but because so few teams want to play it, which is then exacerbated by Astralis beating everyone on it, people don't permaban it because no one picks it against them anyway. So the rest of the fucking scene primes everyone else to get beaten by Astralis, because you have a different map as your permaban, so you're not going to give that up, because then Astralis will just pick whatever your permaban is, Mirage, whatever it might, Overpass, whatever it could be. And so since you don't permaban Nuke, then Astralis just picks it all the time, because for people who don't know, when they first made this lineup, they actually weren't spamming Nuke, because obviously they didn't know they were the best at it yet. What they did is, at the time, they were actually just flexing the pool all over the place. They would pick one of your weaker maps, but they had a load that were really good themselves. And then obviously initially they even actually sometimes fucked with the permaban after Cobblestone went out, you know. It's just eventually, once they realised, like, we're never losing Nuke, and it's available against so many teams, and it's like a free win. Well, obviously we're just going to pick it then. That's just intelligent at that point in time, you know. And in fact, I actually think they probably didn't even know it was going to be like their home map. I bet it was till quite a way into the streak. If I had to guess, I'd bet like at least over 10 wins, because part of you is thinking to yourself as well, surely someone's going to beat us eventually, or someone's going to get a good counter to something we do, you know, and we'll have to flex away from it. I agree with you on that point there, Moses. Like, because what's good about that is, on the one hand, I'm agreeing. Like, if I had to pick a map win rate, sure, 28 is pretty insane. But you know what? SK winning 17 in a row, whatever it was, on Train, that's pretty insane, because everyone played Train. Like, that's a pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
You know, they were going head-to-head with the best Train teams and banging them out. So that, in some ways, that's as impressive to me. But like I say, the reason why it's not really a diss is because, in a weird way, I actually think Astralis might have even been more impressive if people had beaten them on Nuke eventually. I think you would have seen them just move around the pool, as they do now, by the way, with their pick. So, for example, you don't see them picking Mirage against people nowadays. You don't see them go to Overpass anymore now that they've got losses on it. They just go elsewhere in the map and they keep winning.
They've shown some weaknesses, and nothing crazy, but they have dropped, you know, a few individual maps. Overpass, I referenced earlier, Mirage has looked shaky at times. I mean, obviously, if you can somehow force them on cash, which will probably never happen. But this is a team, Astralis, that I often wonder, if any team would be able to handle it, why don't they just make a 7-map pool? Why don't they just not have a permaban? Make it that much more difficult to read what you're going to do into the veto process. Like, that'd be so wild if all of a sudden they came out of this break, like, and just practiced fucking cash to their heart's content, and came into the major. We're like, now we can play cash too, motherfuckers. Bring it.
I mean, I think Astralis this year have floated cash as their permaban. They like won't ban it, knowing that the other team won't pick it. If it's a team like Liquid, they'll avoid they'll first ban that. But like I think that's a key innovation that teams like FaZe and Australis have made this year. I did a video on this. Basically, you will see in series that Australis and FaZe specifically will float their permaban, and I think it's a good strategy. Like if it's 6th or 7th in the other team's pool, you're permaban, right? They're not going to be liable to pick it first pick, or they might, but maybe it's just as bad as what other map the other team would pick. Maybe there's some advantage on the other side. So I don't like the FaZe first banning Nuke, I think is a good idea. I think Astralis moving around with Cash was a good idea. I think, as I was saying earlier, I think Liquid trying to ban Nuke here, maybe it's a gimmick, as you were saying, but like I think it was a good idea. I think floating your permaban is like a new strategy, and I think that more teams should do it. And I wish Liquid and other teams would do it more. I think, and if you even look at teams who have beaten Astralis, MIBR and FaZe. I mean, MIBR first bans Nuke, FaZe first bans Nuke versus Astralis.
Well, here's the funny thing. If you take that strategy, because I was actually thinking something similar. Like, I actually thought to myself, like, I actually personally, as I alluded to, I think it was a gamble to actually pick Train as your map. Like, to be fair, it's a best of 5, so the maps are all getting played anyway. So, in that sense, it doesn't really matter. But, like, if you're in a best of 3, I actually would do what you just said there. I would float my ban, assuming my ban is one of the maps that isn't Astralis' best map. Like, I know no teams do ban it, but if my permaban was like Inferno, I definitely wouldn't float that against Astralis, because if they pick it, they're just going to smash me on it. But let's say your permaban is Mirage, Overpass. Why the fuck are you banning that against Astralis? Because you want them to waste their pick on that map. And if they don't waste their pick on that map, you have just now secured 2 vetoes that you can choose. You can ban something there, and then second rotation, ban that map out anyway. So that's actually bizarrely a counterintuitive strategy that I think would be a good idea against Astralis. Like, why let Astralis just go into a map like Nuke? Dare them to waste their time playing Mirage against you because they know you're bad at Mirage. Like, you probably have a better chance on that particular scenario at the moment than the map that no one can beat them on. Like, it sounds counterintuitive, but there is a logic to that, as weird as it sounds, because what you're trying to do basically is create an artificial edge. It only lasts 1 series, to be fair, against a team that at the moment has no disadvantage in the map veto. Like, as we've just said before, the teams that actually have been primed to do well against Astralis are teams that just purely through happenstance already banned Nuke anyway. Like, they didn't do that because they're smart. Like, MIBR didn't go, you know what, we're going to go back in time 2 years and just agree never to play Nuke anyway. Oh, what's that? Astralis is the best on Nuke? Cool. We have a chance to beat him now. So, in a weird way, you should follow their suit. It's just not going to work in the long run like it will for them. But you could do it temporarily, definitely, because I've always thought that's like a very underrated approach. I actually think generally, by the way, to make it more of a bigger topic like you were talking about, Moses, that's one of the areas that CSGO is very whacking. Like, I'm going to call out most of the coaches in the scene right now. It is astounding to me how many coaches will permaban a map the other team is not going to pick. And if they did pick, as I just alluded to, it would be to your advantage because it's their map pick. If they want to waste their map pick on their 5th best map, that's a win for you, you idiot. It doesn't matter even if you don't play that map. That is a better win for you than them picking their 2nd best map. Think about it logically. Like, that's actually a scenario, especially if you're an underdog, that you want to create. Now, here's the thing. I will say, if you're an underdog, you are still going to lose some of these games. Like, you might still end up looking like an idiot. But it will every now and then lead to the unlikely scenario you will win in a series you would not have won if everyone picked the maps that everyone knows we're going to pick and everyone banned the maps we know we're going to ban. Like, that's an area where, we're not talking just about Astralis here, it is baffling to me some of the times I've seen Na'Vi ban Cash against teams who don't play Cash. I've even seen Na'Vi ban Cash against teams who fucking permaban Cash. It's like, would you just help me out? Meet me halfway on this one. I've even, like, at this point in time, this is why I'm calling out all the coaches. I don't even need all of you to come on board with this. I only need like 4 of you that are on relevant teams to do this, and the others will have to follow suit. Like, as much as I will criticize Zeus for some of the things he does and some of his picks, if he starts having to ban Cash as the 2nd person banning, and you normally permaban Cash, surely even he's going to figure that out eventually. Like, that's weird. Don't they normally ban it? Why am I having to ban it against it? Surely even he's going to put that one together eventually. He said, referring to the man who still picks Inferno, a map he has a losing record on, in a map pool where he has 5 maps with like a winning record. So maybe I am naive imagining old boy Zeus is going to come through with the new adaptation to the game and not just run down the fucking clock every single round and then say super Pliat and then let St. Paul carry 32 kills and lose the game. So tactical genius, I don't know about that. Good leader, yeah, in some ways. Man alive, what a world.
Well,
you know the other thing
the major final was this new Navi band Cash first, right? Versus Astralis.
Pretty good.
Former band is mostly Cash.
That's
right?
genius, by the way. Think about that.
Yeah.
You're saying to them, right, you know what? It's really tough to play you at the moment because it seems like you have 6 out of the 7 maps. Here you go. Have another free band. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that though? Like, there's very few times, right? Even if we're harsh on the analysis desk, there's very few times you can objectively say someone made the wrong move. Like, usually it's subjective, like, well, I think it would have gone differently or whatever. That's one of the rare cases I can say you objectively fucked up 100% of the way. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to have done that.
Well, yeah. I think it's this tendency. I think you've talked about it before, both of you probably, but it's like this tendency to play towards comfort. Like the idea that the other team can just embarrass you on your worst map,
people are so
you
scared
in practice or play is just like too much of a mental strain for them to even go for that in a series. You guys here? Hello. Okay.
Maybe Moses died. Oh, you back? Hello, Moses?
Yeah. My Skype just closed for
no reason. Never mind. Well, I could see you the whole time, so I assumed you were listening anyway, right? Let me think. I had a point that I was going to make.
Make it a good one.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that is actually, like, this will sound like such an abstract point, it can't be actually applied to anything, because it can't. It has no practical use. But one thing I will say that is kind of whack about Astralis being so dominant in the way that we have to frame every conversation is we are all, in a weird way, falling into the trap I actually pointed out earlier with maps, which is that, when you win like 28 games in a row on Nuke, you didn't have an unbeatable Nuke in map 1 and just carry that through 28 times and win. Like, it's not like they're all idiots and they couldn't figure you out. Like, no, part of why they couldn't figure you out is like what we alluded to. First of all, you're changing your base strategies, and then secondly, you have the best mid-round team as well. Like, having the best mid-round team alone is going to be a great way to keep running a map that everyone knows you're really good on. But it goes beyond that, because the reason why it's so hard to get out of this thinking is because when human beings spot a pattern, they immediately think, well, that pattern's going to continue to repeat. So a great example, I'll give you a very relevant one, would be all the people who said that right up until it went down that you should buy Bitcoin. And their logic was, well, Bitcoin's going up, isn't it? And I sat some really intelligent people down. I even sat a guy down who had a fucking degree in mathematics. And when he said that to me, I said, you do know, right, that there's no momentum here. Like, it's not going up because it went up before. I mean, it is in a way, because stocks do go by consumer confidence, etc., and that sort of thing. So in a small way, he's right. But the reason why he's wrong is because the best way to phrase this is like this. Something is going up until the second it isn't. Well, what's the reason it stops going up? Well, that has nothing to do with anything that happened before. So in the same sense, like, what's mad is, until Australis properly gets beaten and isn't the #1 team, we expect them to win every series, every match, every tournament. But eventually, not only will they not, but if you look at history, they will not, and then they'll just won't win again. Like, they're just not, like, that's the weird thing about Counter-Strike, if you think about it. The dominant team doesn't slowly taper off. You tend to be dominant, and then you just stop winning, and then you just don't win at all. It's like the cut-off period is so harsh. So the problem with that is, the reason why I say it's an abstract is because on one level, some of these teams could make no roster moves, change very little, and in 3 months, Astralis might just not be a very good team. They might be the 5th best team suddenly. Maybe a player goes to shit, they have an internal problem, a map gets changed, they become bad. There's a million reasons it could happen. At which point in time, for all we know, the funny thing about Counter-Strike is it might not even be a Team Liquid or Na'Vi. It could be fucking Mousesports becomes the best team at that point in time. Who knows, right? Because it would be different factors behind it. So that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to make actual predictions in Counter-Strike. Like, I have to say this, if you think back in history, almost every time you reached the peak of a team where you were like, wow, this team's going to win a lot more tournaments, it's amazing how many times they win like one more tournament after that and then nothing else ever again. Like, the first Australis looked like that. This team's going to win for days. Couldn't win another fucking tournament the rest of 2017. SK Gaming, they were literally like looking like one of the best teams of all time at the end of last year. Didn't win shit this year, went to shit complete. FaZe Clan just had all those semis and finals they didn't win and then dropped off. Like, it's actually kind of wild how harsh it turns. The difference is, and this is what I want to bring up, is Australis the team that can buck that trend? Because obviously one of the things none of those teams had was like infrastructure, a legit coach, you know. Most of the other teams had defined like star player, etc. You know, there's a lot of factors I could see like making that not apply to Australis somehow, as much as that sounds like I've just counted everything I just said.
I think that's the key, and I think that's why the answer has to be yes. Where I do think if anyone's going to make it like more longevity, usually it's been about a year. I think a year and a half for that crazy Fnatic roster, maybe like a little bit less than a year and a half. But it is that infrastructure, and it is the way they approach the game and approach practice. Because no other team does this, but when Astralis shows up to an event, you know they're there to win. Like when other teams show up to events, like you know there could be that cool event announced in some island somewhere with a large prize pool, and it's like, oh, let us go on a vacation and have a chance to make a lot of money. Astralis doesn't do that shit. Astralis is like, you know, there's gonna be a purpose for us going to this event, and I think that's the big difference. That I've never seen Astralis necessarily taking an event off, so to speak, where I have felt like other teams have done that. And with Astralis, it's like, yeah, they might start slow. They might suck in the group stage. They might, you know, really just kind of have to scrape it together. But they're always in peak form by the end of it. By the time the grand finals come around, they're usually playing Liquid. But yeah, I think Astralis is going to be able to set up something a little bit more long-term than what we're used to seeing.
I don't think they're necessarily going to be like some sort of paradigm breaking, like forever best team, or for more than I would say 6 months is like maybe past the majors one really expects things to change. The way I think about it is that a lot of teams in this current system, you can say, okay, the system's the current ladder's weak, but I think the ladder is just old. Like Navi have been together for over a year now. FaZe, I mean, Olafmeister's been in and out, but this original roster with Olafmeister and Guardian started in August 2017. MIBR just aren't relevant. I mean, there are relevant.
Who's gonna dethrone
Astralis? They dropped off
Astralis?
since their peak level.
Who's gonna dethrone Astralis? Who's gonna be the team that we start talking about instead of them?
I think Navi's one good roster move away from challenging Astralis. I think FaZe is, I mean, they're playing with such an inefficient roster. I think both those teams, I don't see that if there is a clear roster move for Liquid to move them apart, but you think there's just so much inefficiency on both Navi and FaZe. And then even MIBR, I mean, think about how inefficient that team is. Like, they have so many, like, you know, 5 major winners, right? So I think, if I had to guess, I would say Navi, just simply because yeah, you know, you guys, a monster. He's having one of the best years ever. I mean, FaZe do have the better matchup because of the nuke ban, and then Nico's also been having a pretty strong form recently. But I would say I would just tend towards Navi because it seems like, yeah, I mean, Edward's such a drag on the team, and then there's available talent on Gambit, which, you know, I don't know why they're not picking that up. Maybe they're waiting till after the major.
Who would you pick, Moses?
What, to go into Navi in place of Edward?
No, as
the best team.
Astralis. Yeah.
I'm still gonna have to. I'm gonna say Liquid. I think they still have everything it takes to do it, and I think they've come close, and they've shown enough good things that I still think they're the closest to being able to do it consistently. I honest to God, I don't have a good answer of why they haven't been able to beat them a single time yet. And obviously that's a big hurdle to overcome, but I would have much more confidence in Team Liquid being able to be like the dethroners. And by that I mean like you have to be able to beat Astralis on a consistent basis. I don't mean like the one-off Navi win we saw in Cologne. I don't mean like the one-off occasional like FaZe win from Sydney or whatever it was. I think Liquid would be the closest, but I think there's a lot of really cool teams coming up that I would have my eye on. Like, I think the Fnatic with the young guys could be very intriguing because I liked where they were headed before. I think NIP is very interesting, and they've always had close games with Astralis. For whatever reason, they're still very good against Astralis if you go back to like DreamHack Stockholm and the major and everything. So I think there's a couple cool young Swedish teams coming up that might be able to challenge.
The thing is, my dream would be this. Like let's say I'll reframe the topic, right? Let's say like I actually had to make a team beat Astralis, And it has to be, like you say, it can't just be once because that's happened. It has to be like, you know, like if they were to play 10 times, you'd win at least 6. There we go, or 7. And therefore you'd have the advantage. And therefore, with the way current scene is, you'd become the number 1 team in theory, you know. Like if I had to actually do that, and I have to, like the whole point is I can't just make a lineup from scratch. You know, I can't just take like fucking Simple and Cold Zero and put them all on one team. If I have to take a current team and do like not an impossible roster move, this is what I would do. I would take the current team Liquid, and I would either add Karrigan or Fallen as the in-game leader. Because I think that the key thing there is, first of all, it's not impossible those 2 moves could happen. Because Team Liquid as an org has money, and Steve Arneset, one of the owners of the team, in League of Legends particularly, and as well in CSGO, we just don't know as well, has been very willing to write massive checks to get people to come to his teams. And he crucially has actually a mentality that I wish more people in esports has, which is he even says that he will make offers he thinks have a very low chance of getting accepted. Like basically you just want to even, like if there's even a 1% chance, you throw the offer out there because like 1% of the time, the guy might say yes, or maybe even just the offer, the guy thinks he wouldn't do it, but then when he actually thinks about, maybe I would think of that, you know. Well, the reason why Team Liquid would be so attractive is because if you're an in-game leader and you come into that team, there's very few teams in the world you would want to inherit as a squad because they've got all these amazing fundamentals. They've got all this. They've got this bevy of young star players, all of whom are like a tick away from becoming like even better and legit being like the best player in the world. Like, a whole bunch of them are that close. And at the moment, you look at them, and it's not actually an in-game flaw that stops them winning. It's seemingly psychological. Some kind of component like that. Well, the key thing is, as we saw in Australis itself, the in-game leader change can have the biggest impact. It can only sometimes be one player, but it can change the whole culture, the mindset, partly because one of the things I've always thought is a great factor of good in-game leaders that unfortunately is an intangible you can never chart in the game, is one of the reasons why the great in-game leaders, I think, have success is because, I mean, the way you phrase it now is you say people buy into their system, but that sounds too much like it's like you just do your job, etc. No, what happens is people believe what the guy tells them. Like, if someone... this is one of the reasons why I actually think MSL eventually got basically, like, fucking Jon Snowed out of the Night's Watch of North, right? Is because, in the end, people didn't believe in... Like, they know MSL's a good leader, and they know his strats are decent, but they didn't believe that he made this call, that it was the right call. And they didn't believe that when he said, this is the map we should play, that it was the right play. And if he said, this is your role you should do, some of them didn't believe, which is why some of the stars end up leaving, being ousted from the team. People tried to mutiny against him. The difference is, as much as anyone from the West wants to bag on Zeus, because he's got a lot of flaws as an in-game leader, and he's done a lot of stupid things as a captain, I tell you what, players in his team actually believe in him. Like, they have a much higher opinion in Na'Vi of Zeus than anyone outside Na'Vi does. Like, they actually believe... Because, let's face it, if you look at them as a team, most of them have never been on a team as good as Na'Vi. Most of them have never won tournaments before Na'Vi. So, to them, Zeus gave them that. Zeus gave them this position to win. Gave them a chance to have this role. Like, that's why I think Karrigan and Fallen, the 2 players who... They have the experience... In theory, I know in Fallen's case he might not be looking for a team, but in theory these are people who might be willing to leave a team and join another very good team. Obviously in Karrigan's case it's probably even doable, and they have the track record not only of literally beating Australis teams in the past, but it doesn't apply to Karrigan as much, but in Fallen's case he can even be the primary AWPer. Like, it could actually even slot into that role. So that would be my dream move if I could do it tomorrow, because there's only one player change, but I think that could be the difference maker. Because to me, like, you know, in some ways, IGL is kind of like the quarterback aspect. You know, it can change the whole complexion of the team. Whether that player is literally a star player like a quarterback, or just, I mean, actually, it's a pretty decent analogy because you have quarterbacks who aren't even star players, but work better in different teams than others, right?
The game managers, as we like to call them.
Yes. Yeah. The fucking Kirk Cousins type motherfuckers of the world. Who somehow keep getting checked.
I hadn't thought of Karrigan going to Liquid. Oh, yeah. What are you saying?
No,
talking football. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about Karrigan going Liquid. I think that's interesting, but like, I don't know if like, I mean, you call Liquid a poor man's Astralis, but I don't think Liquid would work as a poor man's FaZe if you transplant Karrigan over, and then you also have to worry like, okay, maybe Karrigan actually wasn't the right fish for the Australis lineup, which you compare Liquid to. That actually he maybe more aligns with a FaZe style of play. That was sort of the tension, and going more tactical was actually with Gleb was what allowed them to be so much more successful. So I'm not sure like Karrigan would be an instant upgrade or 100% upgrade. It's definitely an interesting move.
Put a pin in that for 1 second, because if you're going to address the follow one, do it after this. Because let me just give a counterpoint to that, which is one thing I want to address, right? Because generally, like I've obviously I craft narratives myself, but sometimes I think narratives get out of control, or they just get exaggerated because we just all repeat them 50 times. Like I do it myself; it's easy to do. But one of the ones that I actually think is really overplayed is the angle of like, FaZe now is how Karrigan always wanted to play in Astralis, and that's why they eventually kicked him out the team. Like, that is true. There's a lot of, it's not even just a grain, there's a lot of truth to that, but it doesn't work as like a blanket statement, because first of all, for anyone who isn't aware, the team that he got kicked out of was at one point in time very fucking good. Like, it's not like they were like, oh, it just doesn't work and your style's wrong. They were winning tournaments. And remember, this is the key detail I always bring up with that team, because it's easy to remember that TSM didn't win the major and that they had a lot of semis and finals they lost. People forget they won 7 out of 8 series against Fnatic 2015. Like, this was a fucking amazing team that more than worked inside Counter-Strike. So the real problem there is, believe it or not, I actually think that ties into my point that I was given about MSL, is up at the point they were winning, they were all in on Karrigan's style. Believe me, they thought it was the best style. They thought the guy had it cracked when they were in the TSM team. They thought he was the god. He was doing an amazing job. But the point is, once they'd lost enough, and then once actually they had their own Team Liquid style thing, where it was like, even when they play a lesser team in a certain match, they lose. That was when people were like, right, fuck this. We can't keep doing the same style now. Like, you know, now we need the change. And in fact, eventually, funnily enough, in their team in TSM, a very interesting detail is, they were a team that held on to their lineups for a long time because they had those teams, a bit like FaZe now, where it's like, well, how do you cut anyone? You know, like, how do I cut Cajun B? It's like the problem in Counter-Strike when you make roster moves is you can't really 100% know how a player move is going to work plus and minus. And the problem is, when you have an amazing team, it's kind of like the analogy of what Liquid does in the game playing conservatively. You don't want to give up a really good player unless you get the upgrade. But you can't actually know if it's an upgrade. Like, I know everyone now laughs at Kirby. If you'd have said to anyone before that move happens, Kirby is going to be swapped for Magisk into Astralis, is Astralis better? I bet 9 out of 10 experts say worse. I bet they say worse, because Kirby was considered one of the players that brought Astralis out of their funk, that changed the vibe. In fact, everyone used to even love the angle of, he's a young guy, you know, he didn't have the same problems as the other ones. Magisk was considered semi-washed up. No one was pushing for him to join. I don't know if anyone knows this. It's not actually very well known. I noticed they don't address it in interviews very much. Magisk wasn't even their first choice. They had to pick up Magisk because the window was so short, and he was one of the only players that was like vaguely available, basically. As far as I know, I'll just say this now because who gives a fuck? It's a talk show. I'm not saying this is an official statement. As far as I know, at some point in time, it was supposed to be config. I think that was actually supposed to be the moves. They were trying to do like a like-for-like upgrade, like I just said before. It's just that for whatever reason, I don't think it was available, or maybe you'd always sign with so. I can't remember what the circumstances were, but if you remember, they had like 2 days or something to make the move before like the ESL roster lock.
Probably wanted Valda as well.
That might have been another move, I believe, because if you remember, he was at one point in time benched in fucking North, etc. So yeah, there was a few people they tried beforehand. So like, that's a great example there of how roster moves, like, you kind of have to gamble on them in a way, because even Astralis didn't want this lineup. Even when they had to make a move, didn't originally go for this lineup, and it ended up being perhaps the best lineup ever, so no one could really know what roster move works. But anyway, that was just a side point. It wasn't really to like, I'm not bringing you down that one, just addressing the wider community point on that one. Did you have anything on the Fallen one?
I think what's concerning with MIBR right now is just how different they are from. So I don't know how much of that is Fallen, how much of that is the new players and the language stuff. You know, I don't know, but so that sort of soured me on Fallen. It's just like, you know, like the old narrative used to be like, they talk 6 hours of theory every single day and they're gonna play the pros plan perfectly every time. It's like, you watch this team, they're just like very poor, like maybe not very poor, but subpar like post plan and the way they play out rounds. And I don't know, like, is Fallen the guy that is going to get like discipline in the team and is going to get them playing on his terms, or is he going to have struggle with as he currently does with North American players? But no, I think that to your point, I do think the Karrigan move is interesting. I'm just not 100% sold that it would like take a Liquid.
No, by the way, it could also completely fail. Yeah, I'm absolutely up to that. It's not a surefire move. I'm trying to spitball a concept. Yeah. What do you think, Moses?
I think Karrigan to Liquid, if that ever happened, that'd be kind of interesting. Just because that's a team that is a little bit more structured at the moment, which is not what he would be used to, obviously, having been in phase for some time. But I think
here's the coolest thing, Moses. Like, I don't know what he would do and how he would play. Actually, that's one of the things I forgot to mention when I said that, is that I actually don't think he, like, okay, actually that's the point I didn't make. I got too caught in the TSM part explaining why TSM was brilliant, and then I went off into sort of like
tangent.
It's like one of those episodes where everyone gets trapped in an elevator and like, remember the time last episode when you came to our school late? And it's like, and then there's just a clip show episode. What I forgot to mention was this, Wallaby, is I actually don't think that Carrigan does. His ideal vision of Counter-Strike is not what FaZe plays. That is the most exaggerated version, because look at the pieces he has to use. Like, there's almost no other way to play with FaZe Clan. Like, it wouldn't really make sense to put massive amounts of structure. I actually think, personally, if he had his way and a different team, he would play like something in the middle. He would have some freedom for the star players, some of the other players. So if you have a player like Taco, you're definitely just going to turn him loose. He's going to play he's going to be the team player base with you, as it were. I think he would do like a mix of the two. So that's why I don't think it's like as crazy like that. They're the mini Astralis and it wouldn't work with the FaZe guy because he's the anti Astralis. Like, that's just a bit too extreme. But the other angle the other angle that I want to throw in though is the reason why Carrigan would also be a sick addition to that team is because here's the thing he can say, Moses. The second he walks through the door for his first team meeting, he can just write on a board 0. And then everyone goes, well, what is that? And he goes, that's the number of series you've won against this Astralis team. And he goes up to the same board. 3. That's the number of series I've won against this Astralis team. Now, anyone unclear on those numbers? No. Right. Class in session. You're all going to do everything I say. And if it isn't, then hit the bricks. Like, at that point, he just goes into like Alec Baldwin out fucking Glengarry, just starts reaming motherfuckers out like Nitro. Well, actually, to be fair, Nitro isn't even there this night. I don't know why I picked that one. Just go, I don't know, go through like twists, like twists, crippling injuries. Device has got those. What's your excuse? Exactly. Get fucking in the game. Only closers can get to have time off or something. I don't know, some shit like that, like, you just go with that angle, don't you?
That was the point I was going to make, though, is if Carrigan comes in, I think this team is structured enough and he wants a little bit more looser that there's going to be a happy medium. Like, it's never going to, it wouldn't shift all the way to like the FaZe style, and it wouldn't stay all the way in like an Astralis style. There would be a comfortable medium that the team would find, even if it's just, this round is structured, this round is chaotic, and whatever it might be. So I think that could be intriguing. But yeah, again, I mean, I don't even think it's necessarily worth talking about roster changes. That's just a cool hypothetical. Yeah, what else did you guys talk about in these long fucking elevator tangents you went off on?
We'll do one last point. We've done a pretty good episode here. Let's pick one solid last point to cover before we end the show. Let me think. Let's make it about Team Liquid then, but let's just remove the Astralis part. So how about this then? I guess the elephant in the room that we didn't address, we sort of alluded to it earlier, is this. Astralis doesn't make every final. More importantly, Astralis doesn't attend every tournament. So here's the real question. Ignoring versus Astralis, does Liquid get over their problem in finals in general and win a tournament maybe that Astralis doesn't attend or someone else beats Astralis? And does Liquid become a champion the other route? Do you think it happens? Would you put your money on it?
Yep.
No.
Absolutely would.
I think Liquid loses too many bad series. Like, I think if Liquid's a mini Astralis, I think Liquid's also like a bigger version of NRG, where they like just lose inexplicable series to bad teams. They like lost to the North lineup with Mertz. I don't have a lot of confidence in them to being like a world beater of every team versus Astralis. They look sick here, but they also have tournaments where they go out in last place to North at, what was that, ESL 1 Cologne?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know part of that there were some external things, and then that loss in particular. But I mean, those are again only things that I know of from talking to some people behind the scenes. So those alarm bells like don't really go too nuts, because I'll tell you this: they had similar issues heading into Chicago, and they made it all the way to the finals, and none of them even know how that happened. They just happened to wreck everyone on the way to getting destroyed by Astralis. So I mean, it's as if it's one of those just very weird scenarios, and it's tough. And I'm going to say yes, because there is just only so many times that you can lose in the finals like this. And I know it's to Astralis. If Astralis isn't there, there. I think the Mousesports is way more of a one-off freak occurrence. You know, fucking moon was in the right part of the sky for that bullshit to happen. Chris J's not going to get a crazy ace again. But I think also if you look at their body of work throughout the whole year, I think they have a positive win record against every other team that you would expect to be in that, despite some, you know, head-scratching losses. I think they've beat Mousesports more than they've lost to them. It's just they lost to them once in the grand finals. I think they've beaten Navi, I'm pretty sure, well more than, I mean, they have a pretty solid record against Navi. Yeah. Even against FaZe, I think they even have, you know, a pretty solid winning record, at least in the second half of the year. So I think if you look at every other team, I want to do this, and I guess this was kind of controversial considering the number of trophies that Navi won, but I just put out that tweet the other day that said Liquid was the number 2 team in the world of 2018 for the entire year. And obviously it's going to have some arguments depending on how much stock you're going to put into those trophies, but I entirely believe that. I think they're well better than Navi. I think they're way better than MIBR at the moment. I think they're way better than FaZe at the moment. So I don't know where you guys stand on that, but Liquid for me is the next best team after Astralis. And if you take Astralis out of the equation, Liquid's the favorite to win those events.
Haven't they also gotten eliminated by NRG? Haven't they lost 2 series to NRG as well?
Yeah, let's not talk about that.
They've also beaten them though. Like they have. Like,
I think the big one was back at that Star Series where NRG made it to the finals because that was like the semifinals or something like that.
Quarters. It was the one where like that was Liquid's bracket basically, and then they just fucked up the first match immediately to remove all suspense as to whether they'd win the tournament. No, the sad thing is I'm actually halfway between the two because on the one hand I agree with Wallaby, like for a team that's so outrageously good that they can have like so many wins over Navi, they can smash FaZe completely over 2 maps when it's FaZe looking super dear. For a team that can do all that, it's outrageous some of the teams they can also lose to. Like it's fucking unbelievable. But at the same time, and this might sound like I'm just a true believer to the end, I also do kind of just think that, kind of like what I said about the Astralis scenario in the finals, Either Team Liquid's just going to play awesome and win a tournament, or eventually a team's just going to themselves bend over and just fucking give them the final. Like, they're going to win some trophies somehow, I actually do think, unless Astralis is there and just beats them every single time. I think it will happen. I don't think it'll matter because I have to say, as much as you will really enjoy that first big tier 1 trophy and all that, if Astralis isn't there or you don't beat them, part of you still knows, like, well, we still haven't done the main thing we have to do. Yeah, so as much as that's going to be good, I don't think that will, like, change everything, unfortunately. Really, you have to beat Astralis for that to happen. What's sad is you don't even have to do it in the final. If you just beat them in the group stage or something, it'll be enough. Sadly, that won't happen at the moment because the number 1 and number 2 ranked teams, you'll be on the opposite side of the ESL-style brackets, you know, in the other groups, so you're probably not going to get that chance early on, but if that happens, you could do it.
Also, we saw him do it in the major. Beat him in a close game in the group stage, and then they just get fucking reamed out once you get to the semis against him. Just embarrassing, crushing losses. That's fun.
Here's the sick thing, Moses, is as bizarre as it sounds, like on the one level, I referenced before that Mousesports final at ESL New York, part of it crushed my soul because I was like, this was supposed to be like every narrative.
It was so bad
that you were going to win this final. We'd all be saying, see, when Astralis isn't there, they're good. Like, let's give them all credit, guys. Look, they're one of the best teams in the world. Blah blah blah. But at the same time, the part that actually gave me some confidence, people might have seen this on my Instagram, is I had a picture where I was with, I think it was from Epicenter, where I was with Twists after they lost the semi-final there. And when I was talking to him, I made this point, because I made a video afterwards about it, that one of the reasons I actually was kind of like willing to go all in on the idea that Twists is the player who can be like the best NA player ever and be like the guy who carries Team Liquid to the next level is because, first of all, not only is he very young and he's still developing, like he's not a finished product, but even more importantly, the one thing he showed me that I never ever got from Tarek, fucking Shroud, Skadoodle, who else? Naf, Elige. The one thing I never got from any of those guys was like the killer competitor mentality. Like the guy who really believes we should beat the other guy. The guy who, when he plays well but his team loses, is legit upset. Like, I could have played even a bit better, you know. Like, when Simple says that, he's not even exaggerating, you know. People think he's trying to be fake humble. He's actually, because he's so good, he knows that there still are a couple of things he could have done differently in a game. So if he loses a game, that's actually a positive of being the star player who takes responsibility. Sure, as an outsider, you go, well, to be fair, Simple, you were amazing, actually. Edward fucked up these 3 rounds. He would have won the game off that. The point is, he knows Edward isn't Simple. So he goes, well, actually, Edward probably did his best. I could have done this 1 round differently, though, and that might have won the game, though. Twist actually does have that mentality. But here's the kicker. Yep. This is the most depressing part, and this is why we're going to end on this note, because that makes a truly Team Liquid podcast. Right after I told everyone, Twists can do it. He's got the mentality. His game's at his peak. His stats are the best. Right after that, he was like fucking, I feel like it was a week later, he came out with that tweet that was like, my illness is hurting me so much. It's breaking me. I'm like, oh, fuck. Why is this? Why is this a thing? Why is this a thing? And there goes all the hope. At that point in time, like, I'm not even joking. I almost just felt like doing that thing where you just like close the whole computer down. Like, well, that's enough internet for today. Like,
I'm done. I'm out. Can't deal with that one.
Man alive. It's unreal, isn't it? This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want to see some teasers? See who's going to be the next guest on one of my shows? Maybe you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.